And I think that's a really solid indication of how wide the topics have been over the course of the last 2.5 days. So for those who haven't seen me before, I'm Steve Creamer. I'm the director of the Air Navigation Bureau, and they have the honor of walking you through with our leaders from the streams the various discussions that we have enjoyed in 4 separate rooms over the course of the last 2.5 days. A lot of new ideas are in your mind, I think, and because the streams have been running in parallel, this is an opportunity for us to share amongst all of us what has been discussed and what we've learned. To achieve this sharing, we've some representatives of each stream here, and we have some questions that we'll pose that will allow them to explore some of the dialogue that's been underway. So first, for the panel on emerging issues, Nancy Graham will be representing the conversation. Dorothy Reimold will be covering commercial space aspects. Christian Schleifer will be the representative on the future of avionics and the CNS stream. And Jean-Francois Grout will represent the information management stream. Allan Storm will talk about the future of civil-military cooperation and that stream's discussion. Farid Zizi, good to see you again, Mr. Farid Zizi. We haven't had a chance to chat. Representing the Airport Operational Performance stream, Mr. William Maynard, representing the Meteorology stream, or MET. And last but not least, Mr. Dan Johnson is going to represent the cyber stream and the cyber threats stream. So, Dan, I'm going to start with you. And I have to warn all of you, I haven't had a chance personally to be in all of the streams, and so I might be surprised by some of the answers, but at the same time, maybe so will you. So first, let's start, Dan, and my curiosity goes to a subject that is going to impact the way we provide all of our services going forward. And how can we reduce the vulnerabilities in an operational environment that we every day uses more and more internet infrastructure to achieve our goals? Do you see benefits of a globally harmonized, trusted network for aviation communications like we've been talking about at ICAO? What are your thoughts?
Well, can you hear me now? Okay, no cyber hacks here, okay. We did have an interesting session over the last couple of days. I'd like to, Steve, thank the staff. They've been awesome in regards to setting it up and getting us into place and get the right people on the panels and stuff. One of the things I see, and I come in from an Intel background, and so I'm looking more at the human factors behind what's going to go on with whatever cyber security standards and policies that you may put in place. A couple of themes that we had throughout our sessions was the common understanding of the ecosystem. I think we throw out the term ecosystem a lot. From our side, we identify it as the 6 A's, the airports, the airlines, aircraft reactors, and airlift and air traffic management. But I think as a bigger organization, we all have to come to agreement on what are the exact terms of references, what are the objects that are associated with this ecosystem that's out there. Second was was really hit upon. A couple of speakers we had there was tailored fuse cybersecurity training and education. Those, kind of almost like easy to do, but it is, when we walked across the, all my travels that I've had, about 85% of all cybersecurity issues are due to lack of cyber hygiene, and so we need to look at that. And then on the Intel side, we did have some questions on that one this morning. It was sharing of intel and information, and to the right players and the right people that can actually do the mitigation actions that are out there in the field, especially when you're trying to do is bring the systems back up and then actually look at attribution of who's coming at you from an actor's perspective. And then lastly was the ability to determine the difference between threats and vulnerabilities. From an Intel side, threats are intent and capability by a various actor out there. Vulnerabilities are flaws within the system. And a lot of times we use the term threats when actually it's a vulnerability within the ecosystem. That's Steve.
Okay, thanks, Dan. I think that that dovetails really well with some of the dialogue we've had in the recent past where we've talked about the Swiss cheese model for safety people. We're really good at making sure that the holes don't line up, and so that we don't have a safety problem where a risk gets all the way through our controls. But now we're kind of battling a new, with this vulnerability that comes from threat, those holes move around, or we have an active seeker trying to get through each of our protections. And that's a new paradigm that we're having to work on together. So thanks for those insights. All right, next, the people using tech and all the connectivity more than anyone else is in the innovative and emerging ops group. So this question is for both Nancy and Dee. What are the first steps that a state that is looking to import these types of operations within the next 5 years? I mean, what should a state do if they're looking to bring this stuff into their environment right up front? First steps.
Ask. That's it. Just simply ask. It's out there. It's operating today, and there are many that are entering into operations in the next 1.5 to 2 years. So we are in this new era today. All you need to do is ask. I think the other thing that's important is that we are all learning together. This is something that's new, but actually in operations. So as we learn together, I really commend ICAO and Steve in particular for example, the drone enable. It's really taking the best practices that are happening in the operational world today, and the technology is really moving faster than the standards. It's probably a good thing in some ways, but capturing that in best practices and sharing that across different countries and continents is really particularly important. So I think you just raise your hand and ask. The thing is, if you don't raise your hand and ask, what's going to happen is the Ministry of Innovation or the Ministry of Telecommunications, they're going to come ask you, hey, how come we don't have this thing in the sky that's delivering internet services? How come you won't let it there? Can you work on that? So I think it really is important that air navigation service providers and CAAs who have a lot to do look ahead and look at ways that they can adopt this new technology and work with others that are doing the same.
Thanks, Nancy. Dee?
Thank you. Can you all hear me? Yeah. To build on what Nancy said, which was absolutely on, is also for any state to acknowledge when they're entertaining the idea about bringing on what we call the new entrant markets, is to take a look at the lessons learned that have happened in commercial aviation. I mean, so much of what we see and experience is building up on that knowledge because, you know, even though these are differing industries between the aviation and the space and the drone community, there's a lot of identical issues. The integration into airspace, the harmonization, infrastructure considerations, obviously safety. So for any of us, whether it's a state with advanced capabilities or a state with desiring these capabilities, you know, to Nancy's point is ask the people that are in the market today, learn from experiences and build on those. And it makes the need for communication and sharing and transparency even more important than ever, because the other thing that I think we try to message to states is the sharing of the information, certainly how we do things, but how quickly these industries are evolving. So we don't have the time or the luxury, frankly, of starting from scratch. So it really is incumbent for all of us to share what we know and what we know works and wave people away from what we know that doesn't work particularly well. So thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Dee. Yeah, I think sharing what we know is a positive set of steps with new entrants so that they can go, yeah, but we do that faster, or we do that different. And then being open to that idea is something that we have to learn through our risk assessment and risk management practices. And certainly the Annex 19 work that we're doing under safety management is designed to help us capture that new innovative capacity in a way that mitigates risk well. So that's great. ComNav surveillance. That's a term that's reasonably broad, covers a lot of ground, but it is evolving and it has a lot of future technologies built in. And Christian, you fly around in an airplane that's got probably some of the best in it, right? Because you've done it yourself. So give us an overview of some of the most important developments that were discussed this week.
Yeah, I'm not so sure if I have the best equipment in my airplane, but at least I have some which enables some of the operational improvements, and let's call it, for example, an S-Bus approach is a good example in a general aviation aircraft where you can use technology which is available and where you can address at least part of the community now. But that's just to my airplane. But more in general, what we discussed was, first of all, it's very difficult. If you look at C, N, and S, in silos, it doesn't give you the operational improvement at the end of the day. We need to see it in once, and that needs to serve the purpose at the end of the day. And this purpose needs to be made clear, more clear in the future. What are the benefits? And the cost-benefit analysis might be different from which perspective you are looking from. An airline, an airport, ANSP, and the oversight or ministry, you mentioned it. So they have a different way to address that. So we have seen there needs to be a lot done in the future to make clear where are the benefits. What we don't want to have, and what the panel clearly mentioned is, we don't want to have a mandate. If the benefit today is not clear enough that everybody goes forward to implement that, I think we missed something. And the mandate should be the last consequence to implement something. So that was a good outcome, and everybody said that. So I said, the next one is that when we look at the technology, and we are looking, I'm sitting between the space here, we're getting more space-based solutions. I think that's a good way forward. I spoke about the S-Bus approach, but we have new common mode failures. So there might be everything coming from space, there might be a failure in the future which affects all space-based solutions, communication, navigation, even surveillance today. So we need to have something where we can revert to and not have a failure which breaks out all the aviation in one day.
Thanks, Christian. I think that really is important from the human perspective. I talked about it in the first day. Failure mode and what that looks like to the people who are using the system is really important. And so being able to think through that as we're taking advantage of these new capabilities is a key to success in getting acceptance in the field. Jean-Francois, what are some of the key challenges in information management that could prevent or slow down the implementation of a globally interoperable IM system? What could be done to overcome some of those challenges? Did you hear all the answers this week?
Well, some, yes. And I will start by a positive statement. Technology is not a challenge. In order to implement information management through system-wide information management, all the technology exists, and we've heard examples in the banking environment and other environments. It's there, it's just for us to use. So that's the good news. Then, of course, there are still challenges, and I like, to lay out probably four, that came out of the discussion during this week. One has to do with governance, because, and that's probably the biggest one with interoperability. We need to have simple rules that apply to all users. And we heard, in our sessions, there was a military example, and they are also looking at using SWIM. And we need to make sure that the rules, we define also works for the military. They should not have different rules just because, they are slightly outside the main ATM stream, because they want to participate. So we need to ensure that what really works for them as well. So, challenges are on governance. We need to make sure that we provide rules and guidance that every organization, be it a state, an airline, an aircraft, a private aircraft operator, or an airport, can apply. Second set of challenges, because we heard that that's also good news that there are a lot of activities around trying SWIM in the different regions. We heard from Europe, the US, Asia, that they are doing SWIM trials, but they do that while we still don't have the standards. So we need to ensure that whatever we come up with allows to bring all those things together and ensure that one region can talk to the other. And I believe technology can make it, but if we're not careful, we might have difficulties later on. So that's the second challenge. The third one is, you have to remember that SWIM and information management is just an enabler. It's there to support benefits coming from operational use cases. And if we don't have strong use cases, we'll have a technology that people won't use, and we had the discussions in the Met panel this morning that, we need people to think about new ways of using the information which will become available. And to me, that's quite important, because in the early days of the ASB modules, when we were trying to define the stream module, we were asking for examples from the other the other modules and what kind of information exchange you need and what we need to support it. And it's difficult short term to get clear answers. So it's also important for people to realize that making information available needs to be there for a purpose and supporting operational improvements. And the last one I like to mention, because we had several questions from the audience on, let's say, could you explain SWIM, for dummies, to help us understand in very simple words what it is, what it could do for us. And so I believe that, there's a need for more awareness campaigns, like what your Bangkok office was doing. I think other regions should do the same and start, explaining SWIM in simple terms so that, let's say, each of those regions can understand what are the benefits for them. Thanks.
I think Steve Jobs said once, simple is the hardest thing to do. So that's probably a tall order that we'll take the challenge of. So thanks for that feedback. So we've got all this new tech, we've got CNS, we've got information management systems. Allan, no problem for you, right? The sky's the limit when it comes to budgets for civ-mil cooperation. What's the path for these solutions? And what is ICAO's role relating to the military?
Thank you, Steve. I guess, of course, we were given the question a little bit in advance to give it some time to think about. So we did have some conversation with some other folks. But I do want to actually do a point and shout out that we do, all the military really appreciate having ICAO invite the military here and for the participation in a military-civil, cooperation stream. So I think it was extremely important, extremely valuable, and thanks to Thomas and the work of the staff, Salo and a lot of people, the room was full. We even had room in the overflow. So I think that is credit that there is a lot of interest in the civil-military cooperation. So I appreciate that. Secondly, I think it's crucial to exploit to the maximum extent possible this civil-military cooperation, at the global level, the regional level, the national level, the local, all the local levels as well. Because, again, more specifically, you have, the ICAO aviation system block upgrades, you have CESAR, you have NextGen, you have CARATS, you have, the global air navigation plan that's being developed. All these will actually impact the military. So it's very important for the civil-military cooperation to fully understand what those impacts are going to be. Unlike some of the commercial airlines and carriers, our budget programs are completely different. We don't work on, a revenue funding stream to come in, of course, and some of the things that we're operating in, similar to the modernization efforts, I'm also having fifth-generation aircraft operating in the same airspace with all the other aircraft that are modernizing, but I'm also having mixed military with between first, second, third, fourth, and now even the fifth generation to include the system. So it's a large mix for the military to ensure that we have this interoperability, the harmonization pieces as well. So I think those all are part of it. But I think the biggest takeaway is to continue putting the military in the loop, to ensure that the military, when there is conversations about the modernization area, that we do bring in the military aviation authorities, however, to have those same conversations, to make them be part of the conversation, and how is the impact. Of course, with Dan being here, one of the newer pieces on this is this new technology that we've heard, as well as the security aspect. So here it is, besides this interoperability and equipage that we've been wrestling with years and years, now all of a sudden I have also new, initiatives that I also have to pay attention to.
Sure, Dee.
Oh, thank you. And Allan, maybe just to add on to that, when I mentioned a little while ago, because it was somewhat of a recurrent theme in our sessions about learning from each other and identifying who the stakeholders were, there's a dynamic, at least that I sense, and it goes toward the civil-military cooperation in particular. So certainly in the case of the U.S., and I suspect it's similar in many parts of the world, the military has extensive experience with things like drones, and you know, to the extent in the launch, you know, the role of NASA and otherwise, and you know, in some of our discussions with the stakeholders, you know, we find that there is not a natural inclination toward sharing what is learned. So, in some ways, maybe Allan, to echo your points, you know, making an overt effort to include military in these kind of dialogues begins, you know, that process of enabling all the stakeholders to know who the players are. And certainly in the U.S., we're finding this is really a very reverse dynamic, if you will, as the military is ceding control of operations at some of the launch facilities to private companies. And, you know, it's been fascinating, certainly for me and others, to watch as this lesson and the sharing of this is how we've done it. And in many cases, the industry is saying, okay, you're doing it, but that's overkill. We don't need to do it to that extent. And that has introduced a whole other discussion in terms of definitions of what is a reasonable level of safety or what is an acceptable level of risk. And so, you know, I just think, I was just trying to make the point that there's so much we can learn from each other.
Oh, I think that's exactly right. And I think civil-military collaboration and sharing of issues and concerns is vital for both of the streams of activity to be able to progress together and share common airspace. And I want to return to cyber for a minute, Dan, and that's, you know, that's a place where we had a portion of our CivMil stream actually talked about cyber, and the challenges. What are the major operational components that are requiring harmonization so that we can continue to have a coordinated, or begin to have a coordinated approach to cybersecurity and resiliency, that perhaps the best practices would have common understanding in both those arenas?
I think when I did sit down on a panel, I think we need to take a couple steps back and see who are the threat actors that are coming at us. And then when we find those threat actors, we find out what capabilities they have, and then they walk back into the mitigation actions. Just wave top that we have ongoing right now, we have terrorists that are out there defacing a lot of the aviation websites. We have criminals that are stealing identities. We've seen ransomware out there. We have insiders, disgruntled employees. All the folks talked about that. And then we got these cyber hackers, and there's a ton of cyber forums that are out there, especially looking at aviation. And then we talked a little bit about hostile nation states and their impact on the cyber ecosystem that's out there. So you got to put that back into the context of, you know, who can actually come after the aviation ecosystem, and then take a look at what we saw as the most critical operational components were the aircraft, the airports, and the ATM. You know, naturally these folks have a lot more experience in you know, the PNT, the command and control, and then the maintenance notebooks that they have, and including stuff that pilots are bringing on actual planes. The potential for malware insertions and stuff like that are very concerning. So we recognize, the group recognized when we worked the civil military side, that it is a system of systems. It's a big network that's out there. You can't have these stovepipes, and we continue to talk about that. And we have to have that trusted partnership. I think that, you know, as you guys move forward with the SWIM construct and that strategic framework, I didn't see any, from the groups that I was with, I didn't see any resistance to that. It's just a matter of how do we implement it and how do we get that trusted group together to operate within that world.
Okay, thanks. So, sounds good, right? No. Sounds like we got a lot of work to do, but we've got some ideas about what the strategies and the concerns are. But we've got two major streams left that are probably the foundational, crucial checkpoints that we get through to get to the rest of these capabilities, and that's weather and airports. So I want to start with airports. Farid, Traffic continues to grow. The trend in airports is towards obviously squeaking out more efficiency and capacity wherever possible. With capacity, new and emerging technologies like total airport management systems, airport collaborative decision-making, introduction of airplanes with folding wingtips even to manage constraints. And on the planning level, there's requirement to have provision of adequate infrastructure in a timely and phased manner. Better runways, terminals, landside capacity. Some of that takes decades in some parts of the world. Other parts not so long. What are the major issues and challenges that were discussed during the stream, solutions to mitigate them so that operational performance continues to improve?
Thank you, Steve. What a nice question. I can give you whatever answer I want. The first thing we have to understand is that an airport is a nice piece of concrete. It's very concrete, and as soon as it is built, it is existing and lasting for long. So if I have a keyword in all our sessions that we have had, I would put collaboration. I know it's the buzz, but the first things you have to do is to plan your airport properly in collaboration with your stakeholders, with a shared vision, and shared not only with aviation actors, but also the local politicians, etc., etc. So plan well and strategize well. And I would even add, because I am beside Nancy, plan future-proof. Envisage the future. Envisage those things which will happen. At least the few seeds you know already. We don't know the future for the 25 years, even with the GAMP, but we can guess a few things already. So don't omit them when you strategize. The second thing we have to do is, as soon as it is built, it has some constraints. So perhaps, and that's what ICAO did with the recent amendments on Annex 14, and that's also what we do with the OLS new proposal, is to put the constraints where you need and only where you need. What we have managed is to accept new types of aircrafts on existing runways, heavy aircrafts. What we have managed is to reduce taxiway separations. What we managed today, and it's a work in course, it's to really put the obstacle limitation where you need, and then offer the states some potential benefits on how they use at least reduce the constraints that they need to. And as soon as you have done all your best, where you plan is use it properly. And use it properly, which means we have the ACDM, collaborative decision making, which is more what we learned is common situational awareness. It's also more tactical. But then we spoke a bit about total management, airport management, going even until ground coordination, with a view of the passenger experience. I love that expression. So not only on the airport, but door to door. Not only airside, landside, and all aspects. Of course, we will have then a number of functionalities that were mentioned, and we will make use of information management, Jean-Francois, for that purpose. It has to connect to the network operations in the ITFM. But yes, that's the way we will do the best use possible of the existing piece of concrete that we have planned some years ago, which we are not envisaging, or which has to envisage that the traffic will continue to grow, because it's a given now, more or less doubling every 15 years worldwide. But being capable to grow in any case. So thank you.
All right, so I'm gonna bring you back on that though. So I've planned my airport, I built it, got my money invested, I'm looking for my payout, and then my best next door neighbor decides they want to build a skyscraper. So how do the new proposed airdrome obstacle surfaces ease the planning and enhance the overall performance of an airport? How can that help?
It's not easing the planning. It's putting, I would say, the constraints where you need. The first, it is clear in the mindset. What they offer is obstacle-free zone and obstacle evaluation zones. So there are things, places where you don't have obstacles, and there are places where you do an aeronautical study and a safety assessment to allow things, and then towards the operations you want to have on your airport, you will do it. Of course, what it brings to you, it's where you had very hard lines previously. Now you will have to decide, but you will decide normally in a good collaboration with your partners and stakeholders, like the other themes that we were discussing, and you will decide also making a clear balance in between safety and the potential benefits your skyscrapers and whatever other land owners around your airport or hotels, business activities, whatever they want to develop. But at least it's not the regulation that will artificially create the constraints. If there are constraints, they exist, accept them. If there are not, don't create them artificially.
I think that's actually a great point that I want to capture for everybody here. With lower volumes and less traffic and less capacity to manage information like we used to have before information management, hard constraints were a simple way to get everybody to do the same thing the same way. But now we have capabilities to manage massive amounts of information, and we're putting airplanes and vehicles in an environment where they're facing very, very different circumstances, and it can be assessed on an individual basis as opposed to against prescriptive rules. And that means more and more decisions have to be made. So in the future, we're going to have to think about how those decisions are made. Are they made by people, one at a time, or are they made by perhaps machines using a set of rules defined by people that we all understand? And that's something we'll maybe delve into as we go to the second half of this. And that might have a big impact on how we deal with weather. So, Bill, tell us a little bit about what we can expect in changes to the meteorological services in the next few years that will allow me to make decisions more effectively.
Well, there should be a lot of good news coming forward because we've been kind of constrained by the technological limitations of our legacy systems for so many years that the teletype era still very much defines what the limitations on the code forms we've been using are for a long time. And I've heard at a couple of the sessions, people talked about the Big Bang happening. In the weather area, a lot of the Big Bang has already happened. It's just concealed behind a technical firewall that we need to progressively remove in order to provide the full benefits of a new way of doing things going forward. We're really close to what I would call a paradigm shift on these things, a real quantum jump, because we're going to go to a new way of doing things where really instead of it being a push system, it's going to be a pull system. So you imagine any flight, anywhere, anytime, and the weather information you get for it will be tailored to the exact decision-making and flight planning requirements of that exact flight at that exact time. And you'll get no more and no less, exactly tailored to it. And that takes a little bit of collaboration to get there because we need to make sure we define exactly what those requirements actually are. The reality is, though, the computing power and capability of providing those kinds of services already exist. It's a question of how do we get from where we are now to that future. And we do have a plan, and it's coordinated with SWIM and the information management panel and such as to how to actually manage it. Weather information is, frankly, it's a tremendous amount of information that's constantly changing. So it needs to have some rules on how to do that. But it needs to be done in such a way that when the people planning a particular flight need that information, they get exactly what they want. The altitude, times, temperatures, everything exactly for that flight. And we can go there. Now, to fully do that, we need to remain in a cooperative and collaborative manner with a number of partners in there. The World Meteorological Organization helps us with the science on that. We need to continue to talk with the airlines, the operators, the dispatch operations people, the scientists behind this that can bring us to that future, because there's a lot of work actually going on. And we need to move the standards that are in the Annex 3 upwards to this future to make it more performance written and to move away from the old teletype days where it was, I think everyone in this audience can probably remember trying to read a TAF or a METAR. But the only thing we've really evolved in the last 50 years is that now a new digital machine can read that teletype thing and translate it into other formats. So you can take those winds, you can interpolate them, and you can provide them. But we can do far better than that right now. We can provide you with the exact information for any exact point in space and time in the world and do it along a pathway. So we're pretty much ready to do trajectory-based operations in terms of supporting it. We need to define a little bit of what those requirements are. So we need to continue that cooperation and talk with the people. And that's part of the main reason why we have a meteorological panel, is to bring in these people and make sure we define exactly what those requirements are, no more, no less, and provide exactly what's needed on a demand-driven basis when it's needed for either flight planning or decision-making requirements.
Okay. Jean-Francois.
Yeah, if I may, I'd just like to add a point. With SWIM, we'll be able to exchange graphical information, which today, in the teletype environment, was not really possible. I'm not saying that it didn't happen, but it was very complicated. And because, we have the requirements from the Met community, in SWIM, we're ensuring that those graphical information can be exchanged. And I think that's a good example of collaborations, between two streams of activities to ensure that, we provide information for the benefit of the community.
All right, thank you. So, anybody heard anything that makes them go, I've got something else to add, or I've thought of something else that came out of my stream? Because if you don't, I'm going to ask some other folks if they've heard some things. Okay, so Christian and Nancy, or Nancy
First, but you give it back?
I will.
You promise?
You're such a gentleman.
They're working under government constraints, 2 microphones for 8 people.
Oh, we go
Okay.
back a long ways, don't we, boys? Yeah. Okay. A couple things that I wanted to share, if you weren't in the first panel. One is, think about how we struggle in the aviation community to bring forward these new technologies and put them in place, and how long it takes us. We all just shake our heads sometimes and go, oh my God, it just takes forever. So ask yourself, when will we have this kind of injection of new cash into aviation again in our lifetimes? So let me just lay out a couple of statistics for you. The telecommunications business industry is a $5 trillion, yes, she said $trillion industry annually. And the high-altitude platforms, whether they're balloons or UAVs or whatever, the lighter than air aircraft, is a $121 billion industry. Now, when do you think you're going to see that kind of cash in aviation again? This is all not state money. This is private money that's coming into the aviation stream. So it's incumbent on us to help them help you. This industry will be the first to implement trajectory-based operations, whether that be at a low level into UTM or a high level, and whatever we call UTM at the high level. So it's really incumbent upon us to seize the opportunity to help these new entrants help us to implement these things faster. So I just want to offer that the Coordinating Council for, International Coordinating Council for Aviation will be putting up a paper for the Air Navigation Conference to get real practical, which is going to propose a set of principles for what we'd like to see the air navigation service community and the CAA community do in terms of positive enabling regulation to support this. So we're going to help. And these guys, when would you have thought that Amazon and Facebook and Google would be willing to help you write proposed regulations? The second is that the industry is willing to work together, and in fact already is working together. The competitors are working together. Write that down. The competitors are working together to implement a safe concept of operations in collaboration with the leading civil aviation authorities around the world that are willing to take this on. That's already happening. And that's going to be in place in the course of the next year or so, before it's even in the Global Air Navigation Plan. It's not even in there yet, and it's in operation. So where ICAO can help is there needs to be some enabling words in the upcoming Global Air Navigation Plan to support that, to encourage that. And there needs to be collaboration on the guidance material that will enable states that are positively moving forward to help those that want to come along. And the industry is willing to cooperate and collaborate on that. So thank you to ICAO for being willing to work with the industry in that regard to enable the whole of that new money actually helping aviation. Over to you, Christian.
Thank you, Nancy. Okay. Actually, a cool project you're talking here. I'm not in your way. Maximum ceiling is 18,000 feet, so yeah, we will not be in our way. Yes, I want to quickly talk about, there are a couple of things where we can do probably a bit better, as we did so far. Data link is a good example where we have seen harmonized implementation. We see a different implementation strategy in the air as on the ground. We see different solutions to be implemented all over the world, and we see different timelines. So there is something to do where we can do a little bit better. But we also see the low-hanging fruit. They are even as low that I can grab them. I told you, SPAS, the LPV approaches, they are available. We know a way with GBus where we want to go, but there are some challenges. And then we have this multi-constellation, dual frequency multi-constellation. And here is a big warning from the group where they say, okay, there is something out today. There are different constellations coming up, 4 of them, and states start to certify or not certify them, making them available for use or not making them available, or even exclude them. If we go along this line, we will not even get there where we are today with data link and have the crash. We will fail much earlier here. So that's really a warning, and that's something where we have to take care and address that in advance so we are not getting there. ADS-B and surveillance, I think ACAS, good solutions. We have really to talk about harmonization and when we need to take care of having a mixed fleet which could be accepted, or we need an implementation which needs a certain amount of equipage level in order to get the benefits out of the solutions. So that's really something. And also to make a little bit advertisement for the standards developing organizations. We had in all the panels, we see good progress made, that we complement each other, that there are industry standards available. They are developed at the same time, the solutions are developed, the industrialization phase. So make use of it, ICAO, go ahead, make a performance-based regulatory frame supported by industry standards which are available in time, and move a little bit faster and make sure that you are not mandating a technology from the beginning on. Make sure that we have the operational benefit at the end of the day in mind. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Christian. Got a couple of computers, and that mic's been hot for a minute, so I'm going to let Allan go. Go ahead, Allan.
I was going to let Dee go.
All right, go ahead. Dee?
So I'm thinking about our conversations both over the last few days and some of the highlights discussed on this panel today, and we're talking a lot about again the sharing and the operational environments and what we can envision for the future. One of the other aspects that came out in our discussions yesterday, and I suspect they were touched upon in other sessions, is the legal implications. As we're evolving these new entrant markets and enabling through these generous infusions of cash that are coming in, the fact of the matter is that there's this ongoing discussion, I'll call it, not a tension, between what is applicable under aviation law, what is applicable under space law, and to an extent what is applicable under maritime law, because, again, the new world order suggests that any of these could be a platform to enable some kind of operations. And I think while we put this out there as an aspect to be considered, I think there's also a recognition that it is probably one of the tougher aspects, because it is yet a different community to enlighten, to bring into these discussions, and if there are subsequent changes needed in legal regimes, they have to match the pace of everything else. And again, from where many people sit, that won't happen anytime soon. So I think, Steve, as we think or are thoughtful about a way forward, we need to be very conscious of that. And they're hard questions to answer, but they're going to need to be answered.
Okay. Sounded almost like Sanus, but we're still in the future. Okay. Allan?
Thanks, Steve.
Well, let me add a couple more thoughts as I was listening to my colleagues on the right and the left. I would probably also say, if we could summarize some of the things, we need to move from the redundancy where we always talk to more of a resilient system, where I'll speak for the military, where we always say cooperation and coordination, we need to build onto that collaboration. As Dee highlighted, where we have the military and working again with a lot of the air navigation service providers and the commercial operators, et cetera, we do have a lot of lessons. So instead of segregate, we need to be able to integrate. And so I think the biggest takeaway would be that again, civil-military cooperation is more important than it ever has been, listening to everybody along, to the right and left of me. But more importantly, I would hope that I'm speaking for those representatives out here that attended the stream, is that the military is willing to cooperate in all these discussions. I mean, we participate and lead within the weather. We're operating with the cyber, and within the U.S., I mean, we're hand in hand with it. I mean, all these, the airports, we're managers of the airports. So the military is ready, I believe.
Thank you. And go ahead, John.
Since I heard, Christian mentioning Data Link, and I was maybe giving the impression, that stream was replacing the teletype, well, there is also, an airborne dimension to it, and maybe not, today, but tomorrow, the aircraft will be part of stream. And, we had presentations on the, aircraft integrated into stream. There are already some, R&D activities. So one day, the aircraft will be a node in the stream network. And that's something, that we also need to think about. Of course, we don't want to overload the pilot, with a lot of information. But there is definitely information that the pilot can make use of, in during his flight. And, we'll make sure that stream will support that as well.
Okay. Thank you. Dan?
Yeah, one of the areas that I would be neglectful if I didn't touch on is that the groups that we're in, we all saw that there's a lot of vulnerabilities within the cyber ecosystem that's out there for aviation, and the issue comes up is what is the crisis management framework when one of those incidents actually occurs? How do we go back and attribute attribution to whatever threat actor that was out there that actually caused that effect? And then, more importantly, there's a lot of chatter and a lot of noise out there, especially out in the social media. How do we tamper it down? We saw some examples back in the United States a couple of years ago, and we're still spinning and still going up to the hill talking about what one person claimed out on the internet. So we need to have some type of mechanism, that's what I like to push back to you, Steve, that allows a clearinghouse that can go in and say, hey, this is real and this one's Memorex.
Okay. Farid?
Yes, a few dimensions I want to take from our discussions. I love some presentation we had on ACDM and total airport management coming from the institutional transformation that our industry just had with the privatization of a number of factors, which creates the necessity to collaborate where we were one before. And there is something which is important, on my opinion, and this is, I think, true for all systems, is to begin to think an ecosystem, including the business models of the various actors. Where to put the center of gravity of balanced collaboration in a way that we create the global performance, the performance. I don't know what it is, but we heard that idea of performance-based management of the airport, sharing indicators, and then either you push on the throughput or you push on another indicator. And with a multiple actor, I don't know if we need a referee or if we need a machine learning process, but we need a process.
Yeah.
And the other thing I just want to throw also is that the new technologies are offering the possibility to change, for example, to create digitalized services, which would perhaps, we heard baggage Uberization. The luggage are treated outside of the airport. A number of services can be created, avoiding the jam that you would have to manage on the airport. And that's things that we...
Microphone.
Yeah, sorry, it's...
Not talking to me.
No, but it's my... Yeah, I am North African a bit. My hand
Farid
is,
works with his hands, so
yeah,
we're going to...
yes, and this is also a way
Yep.
to manage the constraints, is to make it disappear from the place where it is existing.
That's right.
And I think this should be envisaged, and we should be open to it.
So you've brought me around to a summary at this point, Farid. That was well done. Perfect.
Thank you. We are good friends.
Ladies and gentlemen, what Farid just described, what I've heard from the industry, and we've tried to integrate here at ICAO, is not to advocate for the solution, because we don't have the solutions at ICAO. And I want to illustrate that point to you in a very personal way. A couple of years ago, just before I came back into ICAO, I met an individual who at the time was 27 years old, master's degree in aerospace engineering, and he's manufacturing jet engine parts with essentially the additive manufacturing, laser printing. And he was schooled in it. He knows how it works. He's iterating jet engines now on a daily basis versus a monthly or quarterly basis because of his capacity to understand and use that technology. So I said, well, sounds like a guy I need in airworthiness at ICAO. So how much money do you make? He gave me a kind of a ballpark figure. My heart kind of sunk. And then I thought about him, and I thought about what he's experiencing and how that relates to what I experience as a government regulator. Because I don't have that sleeves rolled up capability to innovate that way, the way he does in the industry he's in. And folks, he's in the traditional aerospace, getting certified by a regulator industry, and they're flying. They're innovating incredibly quickly. So how do I relate to him? I'm almost 60. How many people in this room are under 30 years old? Just for grins. Look around. There are a few hands up. Nobody up here can claim that, all right? 2 weeks ago, we had 500 people in this room, most of whom were under 30 years old, the next generation of aviation professionals, and they all grew up with these. They don't know what a telephone is that you had to pick up a cord on the wall. And they expect better than what we've traditionally been capable of doing. So what I'm hearing described here is a call for some serious change management. And it's change management that has to be done collectively. At ICAO, we'd like to think we're getting positioned to lead on behalf of the states in that regard, not with the answers, but by understanding the question. And you've been bringing us those questions through the things that you're articulating here this week. I have a few prepared things to say here I don't need to say. I think this makes the point. For the states, the big checkpoint in terms of what's coming next to the industry from the regulator and the air navigation provider is the next update to these plans, these global plans, and the decisions that are coming out of the Air Navigation Conference next October. Those decisions will be informed by the input that we've received this week, because all of this information is going to the Air Navigation Commission and going to the Council of ICAO for them to decide what to ask. What are the questions that we want to ask the states so that they can give us their answers? And we wouldn't be capable of doing that credibly in the eyes of that 20-something-year-old without the input that we've heard this week. So I want to thank all of the speakers, all of the presenters, all the members of panels, particularly this group, for their input and the passion that they put into this. And I'd like to ask you to join me in giving them a round of applause. And now the organization has to shift gears. We're not done yet. We're going to take a coffee break and close the Global Air Navigation Industry Symposium, the second ever at ICAO. And then we're going to have the first ever Safety and Air Navigation Implementation Symposium, and we're going to start to try and tackle those questions. What do we need to do together to make what we've heard over the last couple of days a reality that can be implemented with the states? Thank you all very much for your attention. Enjoy the coffee break, and we'll see you back at 3:30.